The scissors glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights of the locker room as Mason Knight cornered Grace Turner against the metal lockers, her cheerleading ponytail trapped in his fist while his two football buddies blocked the exits. In 15 seconds, the new scholarship cheerleader would deliver a roundhouse kick that would not only save her hair, but expose the darkest secret of Willowbrook High's most powerful family. What started as rejected advances and wounded pride would end with 3 boys on the floor and a principal's career in ruins. Subscribe now, because this Texas showdown proves that sometimes the quietest fighters pack the deadliest kicks. Grace Turner stood at her assigned locker in Willowbrook High School at 7:15 a.m., her fingers trembling slightly as she spun the combination lock. The smell of fresh paint and industrial cleaner couldn't mask the underlying scent of privilege that permeated every corner of this elite Texas institution. At 16, Grace was everything Willowbrook wasn't supposed to accept: working class, transfer student, and here on a cheerleading scholarship that barely covered her uniforms. Her reflection in the small magnetic mirror showed tired hazel eyes and natural blonde hair pulled into the regulation-high ponytail required for morning practice. The uniform crisp white and burgundy with the Willowbrook Warriors logo fit perfectly, but Grace knew she'd never truly fit here. Not when her father worked double shifts at the oil refinery to pay for her little brother's medical bills. Not when she'd learned her first cartwheel in a community center gym held together by duct tape and determination. But Grace had a secret that even her scholarship application hadn't revealed. Before her family's financial crisis forced them to move from Houston, she'd spent 8 years training in mixed martial arts at her uncle's dojo. The trophies were packed away in storage now, along with her black belt and the confidence that came with knowing she could defend herself. Here at Willowbrook, she'd chosen to bury that part of herself, to be just another cheerleader trying to earn her spot through jumps and tumbles rather than kicks and strikes. Mason Knight ruled Willowbrook High like a medieval lord surveying his domain. At 6'3", with quarterback shoulders and his father's sharp jawline, he commanded attention whether he wanted it or not. But Mason always wanted it. As the principal's son and captain of the state champion football team, he'd grown up believing the school was his birthright, the students his subjects, and any girl he wanted should be grateful for his attention. His kingdom operated on simple rules. Money talked, talent walked in, and outsiders learned their place or got pushed out. Mason enforced these rules with 2 loyal lieutenants, Brady Chen, whose banker father funded the new stadium, and Tyler Morrison, whose mother sat on the school board. Together, they formed an unholy trinity that had driven out 3 scholarship students in the past 2 years through campaigns of harassment so subtle that no complaint ever stuck. Mason had noticed Grace Turner the moment she'd walked onto the practice field 2 weeks ago. Not just because she was beautiful, though, she was, in that natural way that made the other cheerleaders' expensive highlights look trying too hard. But because of how she moved, there was a controlled grace to her movements, a confidence that went beyond athletics. She executed flips with precision, landed with barely a sound, and carried herself like someone who knew exactly what her body could do. He'd approached her after that first practice, flashing the smile that usually had girls melting. "Hey, I'm Mason. Noticed you killed it out there." Grace had barely glanced at him, focused on packing her gear. "Thanks. So, new girl, how about I show you around town? My treat? There's this great steakhouse my family owns. I'm good. Thanks." She'd zipped her bag and stood to leave. Mason blinked. Unused to rejection? "Come on. Don't be shy. I know being new is tough, but I can make things easier for you here." Grace had finally looked at him then, really looked at him, and Mason felt something unfamiliar under her steady gaze. "I said no thank you. Have a good day." She'd walked away, leaving Mason standing there with his mouth slightly open and Brady snickering behind him. No one said no to Mason Knight, especially not scholarship kids who should be grateful for any attention from Willowbrook royalty. The rejection itself wasn't what turned Mason against her. He'd been turned down before rarely. But it happened. No, What ignited his campaign wasn't wounded romantic pride, but the realization that Grace Turner didn't see him as anything special. She'd looked at him like he was just another teenage boy, not the prince of Willowbrook High. That indifference was a threat to everything his world was built on. If a scholarship kid could dismiss him so easily, what did that say about his power? What did that mean for the social order he'd inherited and enforced? Worse, he'd noticed other students watching their interaction, seeing him fail, seeing her walk away unbothered. That couldn't stand. She thinks she's better than us, he'd told Brady and Tyler later that day. Scholarship girl needs to learn how things work around here. Willowbrook High School sat on 40 acres of manicured Texas landscape, its red brick buildings and white columns projecting an image of Southern gentility that masked a vicious social hierarchy. The cheerleading squad represented the apex of female social power, their practice schedule as demanding as any athlete's, their influence extending into every aspect of school life. Making the team meant more than athletics. It meant acceptance into Willowbrook's inner circle. The locker room where the squad changed was a testament to alumni donations, marble countertops, individual shower stalls, and lockers spacious enough to hold entire wardrobes. It was here that Grace felt most out of place, surrounded by designer gym bags and conversations about spring break in Cabo. She'd learned to change quickly, to avoid the casual discussions of $1,000 shopping sprees and complaints about which Mercedes to drive to school. Morning practice started at 7:30 a.m. sharp. Coach Rivera, a former University of Texas cheerleader with zero tolerance for excuses, ran drills with military precision. Grace had impressed her from day one, executing routines with a control that came from years of martial arts discipline. But impressing the coach meant nothing if the team captain, Brittany Caldwell, decided you didn't belong. And Brittany took her cues from Mason Knight. The harassment started small, the way it always did at Willowbrook. Grace's locker combination was mysteriously changed, forcing her to get maintenance to cut the lock. Her practice clothes disappeared from the laundry service, leaving her to wash them at the laundromat. Someone kept accidentally scheduling her for equipment duty during the time slots reserved for studying in the library. Grace documented each incident in a small notebook, her uncle's voice echoing in her memory. Evidence wins fights before they start. But she knew better than to report anything yet. Not when Mason's father reviewed every complaint that crossed his desk. Not when the last scholarship student who'd spoken up had found their grades mysteriously dropping until they lost their funding. What made it worse was Mason's continued attempts to ask her out, each rejection followed by escalating harassment. He'd corner her after practice with flowers, expensive roses that he'd make sure everyone saw her refuse. He'd loudly invite her to exclusive parties, making her rejection equally public. Each time she said no, the accidents and misunderstandings multiplied. Just say yes once. Brittany had advised during a water break, go to one dinner, let him post some pictures. Then say, you're not compatible. It's easier than fighting him. I'm not interested in easy, Grace had replied. I'm interested in being left alone. The second phase of harassment turned public. During lunch in the cafeteria space that resembled a country club dining room more than a school facility, Mason made his move. Grace sat alone at a corner table, reviewing chemistry notes while eating a sandwich from home. The other cheerleaders clustered at their designated table, shooting glances her way but maintaining their distance. Message received, you might be on the team, but you're not one of us. Grace, Mason's voice boomed across the cafeteria, ensuring maximum audience. He strolled over with Brady and Tyler flanking him, carrying an elaborate bouquet that must have cost $200. Got something for my favorite cheerleader. The cafeteria fell silent, phones already coming out to record. Grace didn't look up from her textbook. I'm studying. Mason, come on, don't be like that. He set the flowers on her table with theatrical flair. I know you're playing hard to get, but everyone knows scholarship girls are just looking for a rich boyfriend. I'm trying to help you out here. The insult was wrapped in a smile. delivered loud enough for everyone to hear. Grace felt the familiar heat of anger rising in her chest, muscle memory begging her to shift into a defensive stance. Instead, she looked up calmly. "I've told you repeatedly that I'm not interested. Please respect that." "Respect?" Mason laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "You want to talk about respect? I've been nothing but nice to you. Flowers, dinner invitations, offering to introduce you to people who matter on by ... and you keep acting like you're too good for me? Newsflash. Scholarship. You're lucky I even noticed you exist." Tyler grabbed her chemistry book, holding it above his head. "Maybe if you spent less time studying and more time being grateful for Mason's attention, you'd fit in better." Grace stood slowly, her movements controlled. At 5'6", she had to tilt her head back to meet Mason's eyes. But 8 years of facing down larger opponents had taught her that size meant nothing if you knew where to strike. "Give me my book back. Say yes to dinner," Brady suggested with a smirk. "One date with Mason and all your problems here disappear. Keep saying no." And he shrugged meaningfully. "Are you threatening me?" Grace asked. Loud enough for nearby tables to hear? Mason stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper only she could hear. "I don't make threats, Grace. I make promises. And I promise you, this stubborn act is going to cost you everything. Your spot on the team, your scholarship, your future here. Unless you stop pretending you're better than what I'm offering." Grace met his eyes steadily. "I'm not pretending anything. I'm just not interested. Not in your flowers, not in your dinners, and definitely not in your threats." Mason's face darkened. He nodded to Tyler, who tossed the textbook into the nearby trash can, pages fluttering like broken wings. "Oops, guess you'll have to dig for it. Good practice for your future when you're out of here." Grace didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't give them the reaction they wanted. She simply memorized their faces, their positions, their weaknesses. Mason favored his right knee old football injury. Brady kept his weight too far forward. Tyler telegraphed his movements with his shoulders. Information filed away for later use. "Smart girl," Mason said when she remained silent. "You're learning? Keep it up. And maybe you'll last the semester. Or you could just say yes. And all this stops. Your choice." They walked away laughing, high-fiving teammates and basking in their perceived victory. Grace waited until they were gone before retrieving her book from the trash. Wiping cold French fries from its cover, around hair, conversation slowly resumed. But she caught the look, some pitying, some impressed, most simply relieved. It wasn't them. Jenna Park slid into the seat across from her, followed surprisingly by a couple of other cheerleaders, Melissa Wong and Ashley Davis. "That was brutal," Melissa said quietly. "I'm sorry we didn't speak up. He's been getting worse," Ashley added, glancing around nervously. "Ever since you turned him down that first time, his ego can't handle it." "It's not about his ego," Jenna corrected. "It's about power. Grace is showing everyone that saying no to Mason Knight is possible. That's dangerous to him." She pulled out her phone, showing Grace a saved folder labeled "Insurance," which is why some of us have been documenting everything Mason does. For when someone's finally brave enough to use it, Grace stared at the folder icon. Understanding dawning. "You're collecting evidence? 3 years worth. Videos. Screenshots. Witness statements. Mason's hurt a lot of people. Grace, both girls who rejected him and scholarship kids who threatened the social order, but nobody's been strong enough to be the catalyst for change." Jenna's eyes searched hers. "Are you?" Before Grace could answer, her phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had tagged her in a social media post. The image showed her digging through the trash, carefully cropped to hide the context. The caption read, "When you're too proud to accept help from your betters, trash scholarship. Know your place." Within minutes, it had dozens of likes and comments, each one more cruel than the last. Grace recognized the coordinated attack, Mason's digital foot soldiers doing his dirty work. She screenshotted everything, adding to her growing file. "See? Jenna said quietly. This is what they do. Death by 1,000 cuts. All deniable. All devastating. Unless someone stops them. The third wave of harassment targeted Grace's position on the squad directly. During afternoon practice, equipment mysteriously malfunctioned whenever she used it. The spring floor seemed slippier under her feet. Safety mats disappeared when she attempted difficult tumbling passes. Coach Rivera grew increasingly frustrated. Not with Grace, but with the obvious sabotage she couldn't prove. Turner, Coach barked after Grace's third near miss on a back handspring. What's going on? You nailed this yesterday. Someone greased the mat. Grace said simply, showing her coach the telltale shine on her palms. Coach Rivera's expression darkened. She'd been at Willowbrook for 5 years, long enough to recognize Mason Knight's handiwork, but she also knew her contract was up for renewal, and Principal Knight had final say. Everyone take 5, she announced. Caldwell, get maintenance to check all equipment. Brittany approached Grace during the break, her voice low. Look, I'm not saying I approve, but Mason really likes you. Actually likes you. Not just wants to hook up. Would it kill you to give him one chance? It would make everyone's life easier, including mine, Grace asked. Brittany hesitated. Maybe not at first, but once he gets what he wants, he usually moves on. And then you'd be under his protection instead of his target. I'm not a prize to be won or a problem to be solved, Grace replied. I'm a person who said no. That should be enough. Should be, Brittany agreed sadly. But at Willowbrook, should doesn't mean much. The whispered threat came during cool-down stretches. Brady Chen dropped down beside her, his voice barely audible over the practice music. Mason wanted me to give you one last chance. Homecoming is coming up. Be his date. Make it public. And all this stops. Keep refusing. And things get worse. Worse how? Grace continued her hamstring stretch. Flexibility. Another gift from martial arts training. Let's just say accidents happen, especially to girls who don't know when to accept a good offer. His hand briefly touched her ponytail. Pretty hair like this. Would be a shame if something happened to it. The threat was so casually delivered that Grace almost laughed. These boys had no idea who they were dealing with. They saw a scholarship cheerleader and assumed weakness. They had no clue she'd once faced down 3 black belts in a tournament finals and walked away victorious. Tell Mason my answer is still no, she said pleasantly. To homecoming. To dinner. To all of it. Brady's face darkened. You're making a mistake. He's given you more chances than anyone else ever got. I didn't ask for chances. I asked to be left alone. That's not how it works here, Brady snapped. You don't get to come into our world and act like you're above it. Mason's offering you a way to belong. Keep refusing, and you'll find out what it really means to be alone at Willowbrook. The incident that changed everything occurred the following Tuesday after late practice. Grace had stayed behind to work on her aerial routine, determined to prove she deserved her spot. Despite the mounting pressure to quit, the gym was supposedly empty. Coach Rivera having left an hour earlier, the other girls scattered to their expensive cars and dinner plans. Grace was alone in the locker room, hair still damp from her shower, when she heard the door bang open. Male voices echoed off the tiles. Mason, Brady, and Tyler, their laughter holding an edge that made her instincts scream danger. Well? Mason drawled, appearing around the corner with something glinting in his hand. Look who's all alone. No crowd to play tough for. Grace's eyes locked onto the scissors knot, the safety-rounded kind from art class, but sharp fabric shears from the equipment room. Her body automatically shifted into a ready stance before she forced herself to appear relaxed. Boys aren't allowed in here. My school. My rules. Mason advanced slowly, his friends spreading out to flank her. You know, Grace, I've been thinking, maybe you keep saying no because you think you're too good for me. Maybe you need to be brought down a level, starting with that perfect ponytail you're so proud of. The space was tight lockers on both sides, bench in the middle. Only one exit now blocked by Tyler's bulk. Grace calculated distances, angles, options. 3 opponents. Confined space. Weapon in play. Her uncle would call this a gift-limited room, meant limited attack vectors. "This is about me rejecting you?" Grace asked, buying time while she positioned herself better. "This is about respect," Mason snarled. "I've been nice. I've been patient. I've offered you everything: protection, status, a future at this school. And you throw it in my face like I'm nobody. Well, guess what? You're about to learn what being nobody really feels like. Touch me and I'll scream," Grace warned, though she knew the gym was too far from the main building for anyone to hear. "Go ahead." Brady laughed, pulling out his phone. "We'll just say you invited us here, changed your mind about Mason, then got hysterical when he said he wasn't interested anymore. Who's going to believe the desperate scholarship girl over us?" Mason lunged forward, faster than Grace expected, his free hand grabbing for her ponytail. But 8 years of training kicked in before conscious thought. Grace pivoted on her left foot, her right leg sweeping up in a perfect roundhouse kick that caught Mason's wrist. The scissors flew from his grip, clattering across the floor as he yelped in pain and surprise. "What the?" Brady started forward, but Grace was already moving. She grabbed his reaching arm, used his momentum against him, and sent him crashing into the lockers with a modified judo throw. The metallic bang echoed through the room as Brady slumped to the floor, dazed. Tyler, the biggest of the 3, charged like a bull. Grace dropped low, swept his legs, and watched 200 pounds of football player hit the tile floor hard enough to knock the wind out of him. She rolled backward, came up in a crouch, and waited. The entire encounter had taken less than 15 seconds. Mason clutched his wrist, staring at her in shock. You can't. My father will." "Your father will what?" Grace stood slowly, keeping all 3 boys in her peripheral vision. "Expel me for defending myself? When the security cameras," she pointed to the obvious dome in the corner, "recorded you entering the girls' locker room with a weapon?" The color drained from Mason's face as he realized his mistake. In his arrogance, he'd forgotten about the new cameras installed after last year's theft incident. Cameras that would show 3 male students cornering a female student with scissors, clearly showing she was defending herself against assault. "We were just trying to scare you." Brady wheezed from his position against the lockers. "Because you kept rejecting Mason. It wasn't supposed to." "Shut up," Mason snapped. But the damage was done. Brady had just admitted their motive on camera. Grace picked up the scissors, careful to only touch them with her towel. "Let me make something clear. My rejection of your advances isn't an insult, Mason. It's a right.all.m. One that you've turned into a campaign of harassment and now attempted assault. That ends today." Tyler managed to sit up, his face red with embarrassment and oxygen deprivation. "You're dead. You know that, right? Nobody attacks us and stays at this school." Grace smiled then, the expression sharp as the scissors in her hand. "I didn't attack anyone. I defended myself against 3 boys who cornered me with a weapon because one of them couldn't handle the word no. But you're right about one thing: someone's leaving this school. Just not who you think." She moved toward the door, forcing them to scramble out of her way. "Oh, and Mason, tell your father I'll be in his office tomorrow morning with video evidence, witness statements from 3 years of your behavior, and my attorney. Let's see how well boys will be boys plays when the news gets hold of this story." As she walked out, leaving 3 of Willowbrook's most powerful students sprawled on the locker room floor, Grace heard Brady whisper, "Dude, she knows martial arts. Like, real martial arts." "Shut up," Mason snarled, but fear had replaced arrogance in his voice. "This isn't over." Grace made it to the parking lot before her hands started shaking. Adrenaline crash. Her uncle had called it the price of controlled violence. She sat in her beat-up Honda Civic, doors locked, and called. "Jenna, you were right," she said when her friend answered. "I'm ready to be the catalyst." "What happened?" Jenna's voice sharpened with concern. Mason happened with scissors in the locker room because I wouldn't date him. Grace took a steadying breath. But the cameras caught everything. And I think it's time to use that folder of yours. Oh my God. Are you okay? Did they hurt you? No. Grace allowed herself a small smile. They're the ones who got hurt. Turns out scholarship kids can fight back when cornered. Grace, this is huge. Mason admitting on camera that this was about you rejecting him? That's game over for their whole "she's lying" defense. Only if the footage survives the night? Grace said grimly. We need to move fast. Already on it. Jenna promised. I'll call my mom. She knows people at the district level. And Grace, I'm proud of you. It's about time someone showed these entitled jerks that no means no, whether you're rich or poor. As Grace drove home, she noticed a text from an unknown number. Security footage already deleted from the main server. But don't worry, I made a copy first. Check your email. A friend in IT, she pulled over, opened her email, and found a video file clear as day. It showed Mason entering with scissors, admitting this was about her rejections, and attacking first. Everything she needed, the chess game had begun. And for the first time since arriving at Willowbrook, Grace Turner wasn't playing defense. Tomorrow would bring Principal Knight's wrath, Mason's retaliation, and a battle for her future at the school. But tonight, she'd protected herself and sent a message that would ripple through Willowbrook's hallowed halls. Money couldn't buy consent. Rejection wasn't an insult. And the new girl might be poor, might be a scholarship student, might be everything they looked down on, but she was nobody's victim. The war for Willowbrook High was about to begin, and Grace Turner had just fired the first shot. The next morning arrived with an autumn chill that seemed to seep through the walls of Willowbrook High. Grace Turner sat in her car at 6:45 a.m., watching the sunrise paint the school's brick facade in shades of gold and crimson. In her bag was a USB drive containing not just the locker room footage, but 3 years of documentation that Jenna and her network had compiled. Today would either mark the end of her time at Willowbrook or the beginning of something unprecedented. Her phone buzzed with texts from numbers she didn't recognize. Word had already spread through the underground network of scholarship students, outcasts, and quiet rebels who'd suffered under Mason Knight's reign. Each message was a variation of the same theme. We're with you. Finally, don't back down. At 7 a.m. sharp, Grace walked into Principal Knight's outer office. His secretary, Mrs. Harmon, looked up with surprise. Miss Turner? You don't have an appointment? He'll want to see me, Grace said calmly. Tell him it's about his son and last night's incident. Mrs. Harmon's face went pale. She'd worked at Willowbrook for 20 years, long enough to know that incidents involving Mason usually meant someone was about to be silenced or transferred. She picked up the phone, whispered a few words, then nodded. He'll see you now. Principal Richard Knight sat behind his massive oak desk like a king on his throne. At 52, he had the same sharp jawline as his son, the same predatory eyes, but with an additional decades of practice at intimidation. The office walls were covered with photos of championship teams, groundbreaking ceremonies, and him shaking hands with powerful people, a shrine to his dominion over Willowbrook. Miss Turner, he said, not offering her a seat. I understand there was an altercation last night. Your son and 2 other students entered the girls' locker room with scissors and attempted to assault me. Grace said, standing straight. I defended myself. Knight's expression didn't change. That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof? Grace pulled out her phone and played the video. Knight watched his son enter the locker room, heard him admit the harassment was about her rejections, saw him lunge with the scissors, and witnessed Grace's defensive response. Throughout it all, his face remained stone. I see, he said when it finished. Clearly there was a misunderstanding. Boys being boys. A prank that went too far. I'll speak to Mason about appropriate boundaries. A prank? Grace kept her voice level. He brought a weapon. He admitted to systematic harassment, This is assault. Knight leaned back in his chair. Miss Turner, let me explain how this works. That video shows my son making a mistake. Yes, but it also shows you using excessive force against 3 students, a scholarship student attacking the quarterback and 2 other prominent athletes. That's grounds for immediate expulsion. I defended myself. You revealed martial arts training that wasn't disclosed on your application. That's falsification of records. Also, grounds for expulsion. His smile was cold. Now, we can handle this quietly. You delete that video, transfer to another school, and we'll ensure your scholarship follows you. Or we can do this the hard way, where you lose everything. Grace had expected this. She pulled out a folder and placed it on his desk. Before you make that decision, you should see this. Knight opened the folder, his confidence faltering as he saw page after page of evidence, screenshots of Mason's threats to other students, financial records showing suspicious grade changes after complaints were filed, testimonies from former students who'd been driven out, and at the bottom, a printout of an email chain between Knight and school board members discussing how to handle problematic scholarship students. Your son is a predator, Grace said quietly, and you've been enabling him. This folder has already been sent to 3 law firms, 2 news stations, and the Texas Education Agency. The only question is whether you want to get ahead of this or let it destroy you. Knight's face had gone from red to white. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have connections. So do I. The door opened and Jenna Park entered, followed by her mother, Federal Judge Caroline Park. Behind them came 2 more people, a man in an expensive suit and a woman with a press badge. Judge Park spoke first. Richard, I believe you know District Attorney Morrison and Sarah Kim from Channel 9 News. They're both very interested in the pattern of behavior at this school. Caroline, Knight started, but she cut him off. My daughter has been documenting your son's behavior for 3 years. She came to me last night with evidence that made me sick. Sick that I'd sent my child to a school where assault is called pranks and victims are silenced. The DA stepped forward. We've opened an investigation into potential criminal charges: assault, harassment, conspiracy to suppress evidence. Your cooperation would be noted. Knight looked trapped, his eyes darting between the faces arrayed against him. This is ridiculous. My son made one mistake. 37, Grace interrupted. That's how many documented incidents are in that folder. 37 times your son hurt someone, and you covered it up. But it ends today. Sarah Kim had her phone out, recording. Principal Knight, do you have a comment about the allegations that you've been protecting students who commit assault? Before Knight could answer, the door burst open again. Mason Knight stormed in, his wrist wrapped in a bandage, followed by his mother, Patricia Knight, still in her tennis outfit. Dad, she's lying, Mason shouted. She attacked us. She's trained in martial arts. She's dangerous. Quiet, Patricia Knight said, her voice like ice. She looked at her husband, then at her son, and finally at the folder on the desk. Show me the video. Patricia, Richard started. Show me the video. Richard. Judge Park handed her a tablet with the footage queued up. Patricia watched in silence as her son cornered a girl with scissors, as he admitted to harassment, as he attacked first. When it finished, she set the tablet down with shaking hands. How long? She asked her husband. How long have you been covering for him? Mom? She's just some scholarship. The slap echoed through the office. Mason staggered back, hand on his cheek, staring at his mother in shock. I raised you better than this? Patricia said, tears in her eyes. I taught you to respect women, to protect those weaker than you, to use your privilege for good. And you became this? She turned to Grace. I am deeply sorry, not just for last night, but for every time my son hurt someone while I remained blind to it. Then to her husband, we're done. The cover-ups, the intimidation, all of it, done. Richard Knight seemed to deflate. Patricia, think about Mason's future. I am thinking about his future. If we don't stop this now, he'll end up in prison. Or worse, he'll become someone who thinks he can take whatever he wants from whoever he wants. She looked at the DA. We'll cooperate fully, whatever you need. The DA nodded. Mason Knight, you're under arrest for assault with a weapon. You have the right to remain silent. As they led Mason out in handcuffs, he kept shouting that it wasn't fair, that Grace had ruined everything, that he was supposed to get a football scholarship. The last thing Grace heard was him screaming. She was supposed to say yes. The next hours passed in a blur. Principal Knight submitted his resignation. Effective immediately, the school board called an emergency meeting. By noon, news vans surrounded Willowbrook High, and number justice for Grace was trending on social media. Grace found herself in the eye of the storm. Sitting in the library with Jenna and a growing group of supporters, Melissa Wong was there. Ashley Davis, Maria Santos from her chemistry class, and dozens of others who'd suffered in silence. I can't believe it's really happening, Maria said, scrolling through her phone. Mason's arrest is all over the news. They're calling for a full investigation of the school. It's not just about Mason, Jenna said firmly. It's about the system that protected him. That's what we're really fighting. Coach Rivera found them there. She looked older somehow, weighed down by guilt. Grace, I owe you an apology. I knew what was happening and I didn't do enough to stop it. You were scared for your job? Grace said. I understand. No, that's not an excuse. I'm a teacher, a coach. I'm supposed to protect my students. She straightened her shoulders. I've already spoken to the school board. I've provided a full report of every incident I witnessed or suspected. And I've recommended you for team captain. Coach, you showed more leadership yesterday than I've seen in 5 years here. The team needs someone like you. Someone who stands up for what's right. The cafeteria at lunch was surreal. Grace walked in to find students applauding. Not everyone there were still pockets of Mason's supporters glaring at her, but enough to make her uncomfortable with the attention. She tried to find her usual corner table, but it was occupied by cheerleaders. Sit with us, Brittany Caldwell said, pulling out a chair. Please, we have a lot to apologize for. Grace sat cautiously as Brittany continued. I told you to just give in, to make your life easier. I was wrong. You showed us that standing up is possible, even when it costs everything. It almost did cost everything, Grace admitted. But it didn't. And now things can change. Brittany pulled out her phone, showing Grace a group chat. We're organizing. Every sport, every club. New policies for reporting harassment. Support networks for scholarship students. Real change. Not just talk. Tyler Morrison approached their table, looking distinctly uncomfortable. His face was bruised from hitting the floor. But that wasn't what made him hesitate. Grace? Can I talk to you? The cafeteria keyed. Watching. Grace nodded. I wanted to apologize, Tyler said, the words seemingly painful. Not because I got caught or because my mom's making me, but because I realized something. I have a little sister. She's 12. And if someone did to her what we tried to do to you, he swallowed hard. I'm sorry, and I'm going to counseling. Real counseling. Not the joke sessions my parents usually buy my way out of. I appreciate that, Tyler, but apologies need to be backed by actions. I know. That's why I'm testifying. About everything, not just last night, but all of it. Every person Mason hurt that I helped him hurt. He met her eyes. I can't undo it, but I can try to make sure it never happens again. Brady Chen wasn't as graceful. He tried to corner Grace after school, hissing about ruined futures and destroyed reputations. You think you won something? Mason's dad has lawyers? This isn't over. You're right, Grace said calmly. It's not over. The investigation is just beginning. How deep do you think they'll dig? Brady, how many of your family's donations came with strings attached? How many grades were changed? Reports buried. Victims silenced? Brady's face went pale. You don't know anything about my family. Jenna's folder is very comprehensive. Your father's bank has some interesting transactions around the times complaints were filed. Grace stepped closer. But here's the thing, Brady, you could follow Mason down, or you could be smart, cooperate, testify, show that you're capable of growth. I don't need to grow, Brady snarled. I need you gone. Then come at me, Grace said simply. But remember what happened last time? And remember that now. Everyone's watching. Brady stormed off. But Grace saw the fear in his eyes. The empire was crumbling, and he knew it. That evening, Grace's father picked her up from school. Juan Turner was a quiet man, hands calloused from refinery work, but his eyes shone with pride. Mia, your mother would be so proud. Standing up like that? Protecting yourself. I was scared. Dad, being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what's right. Despite the fear, he squeezed her shoulder. Your uncle called. He saw the news. He wants you to know, the dojo is proud of you. I didn't want to use it. Grace admitted, the martial arts? I wanted to just be normal here. Normal is overrated. You're exceptional. Grace, not because you can fight, but because you know when to fight and when to show mercy. Those boys are lucky it was you they cornered. Someone else might not have shown such restraint. The school board meeting that night was packed. Parents, students, media, and community members filled every seat. The interim principal, Dr. Patricia Mendez, opened with a statement acknowledging the systematic failures at Willowbrook. When Grace was called to speak, she stood before hundreds of people, her voice steady. I'm not here to destroy Willowbrook High. I'm here because I believe it can be better. Every student deserves to feel safe. Every no should be respected. Every complaint should be heard. That's not too much to ask. She outlined a series of proposals. Mandatory consent education, independent oversight for complaints, protection for scholarship students, and real consequences for harassment, regardless of who commits it. For too long, this school has operated on the principle that some students matter more than others. That ends now, not because I fought back, but because we're all going to stand together. The board voted unanimously to implement her proposals. They also voted to fund a new scholarship program, the Grace Turner Leadership Scholarship, for students who showed courage in standing up for others. As the meeting ended, Mason's mother approached her. Patricia Knight looked exhausted but determined. I wanted you to know that I'm divorcing Richard and Mason. Mason is going to a therapeutic boarding school after his legal issues are resolved. Somewhere he can learn to be better. I hope he does. Grace said sincerely, you could have hurt him worse. The video makes it clear you held back. Patricia's voice broke slightly. Thank you for that, for giving him a chance to learn from this instead of being destroyed by it. The next months brought waves of change. The investigation revealed years of corruption, leading to arrests of several board members and administrators. Willowbrook underwent a complete leadership change. Coach Rivera was promoted to athletic director with a mandate to reform the sports culture. Jenna Park started a nonprofit to help students document and report harassment. Grace became team captain, leading the cheerleading squad to their first state championship in 5 years. But more importantly, she led by example, showing that strength wasn't about domination, but protection, that leadership wasn't about power, but service. At graduation, Grace Turner stood as valedictorian. She looked out at the crowd, her father in the front row, her uncle and cousins who'd driven from Houston, her teammates, and even some former enemies who'd become allies. 3 years ago, I came to Willowbrook as an outsider. She began. I was told to know my place, to be grateful for scraps, to accept harassment as the price of being here. I refused, not because I was brave, but because I was raised to believe that everyone deserves dignity and respect. She paused, finding faces in the crowd. Tyler Morrison, who'd become an advocate for consent education. Brittany Caldwell, who'd transformed the cheerleading team into a genuine sisterhood. Even Brady Chen, who'd eventually cooperated with authorities and was working to make amends. Change doesn't come from one person fighting back. It comes from a community deciding that enough is enough. From allies standing with victims, from systems being reformed and hearts being opened, Willowbrook isn't perfect now. But it's better, and it will keep getting better as long as we remember that every student matters, every voice deserves to be heard, and every no must be respected. As she left the stage to thunderous applause, Grace thought about that night in the locker room, how 3 boys with scissors had tried to cut her down to size, how instead they'd unleashed a revolution that transformed an entire school. Mason Knight was serving community service and mandatory therapy. His father was facing criminal charges. The culture of entitlement and harassment that had poisoned Willowbrook for generations was finally being cleaned out. And Grace Turner? She was heading to the University of Texas on a full scholarship academic this time, though she'd had her pick of cheerleading offers. She planned to study law, inspired by Judge Park and the DA who'd helped her fight for justice. But first, she had a summer job to start, teaching self-defense at her uncle's dojo to teenage girls. Because sometimes the best way to change the world was to teach others to stand strong, fight smart, and never apologize for demanding respect. The girl who'd walked into Willowbrook High as a nobody was leaving as a legend, not because she'd thrown 3 boys to the ground, but because she'd lifted an entire community up, and that was a victory worth more than any championship trophy. As Grace drove away from Willowbrook for the last time, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, then saw the preview, "Thank you for saving my daughter." The message continued, "My daughter is a freshman. Mason had started targeting her before you stopped him. She was too scared to speak up. You gave her courage. You gave all of us courage. The world needs more Grace Turners." Grace smiled, tucking her phone away. The world didn't need more Grace Turners. It needed more people willing to stand up, speak out, and support each other. It needed communities that protected the vulnerable instead of the powerful. It needed schools that taught respect alongside algebra, consent alongside chemistry. The road ahead stretched out before her, full of possibility. Behind her, Willowbrook High continued its transformation, one student at a time, finding the courage to demand better. Sometimes revolutions began with scissors and a girl who refused to let anyone cut her down to size, but they succeeded when everyone realized they had the power to stand tall. Grace Turner had thrown 3 boys in self-defense, but her real victory was in lifting an entire school to its feet.